Right. Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here with me. My name is Oshin Whyte. I am an environmental scientist and consultant from the Turks and Caicos Islands. I currently lead Gaia Environmental, which is an environmental consultancy in the Turks and Caicos, and we focus on environmental impact assessments, sustainable development, and of course, marine conservation. I'm really passionate about the ocean. I'm a PADI dive master, and I also lead sea turtle nesting surveys in East Caicos, which is one of the largest nature reserve area, like wilderness in the insular Caribbean. So yes, thank you so much for being here with me and making the time for this interview. Could you please say your name, your affiliation, and your role here at COP30?
Thank you very much, Ocean. My name is Janine Felson. I am the Ambassador Permanent Representative of Belize to the United Nations. I am, like you, a climate and ocean warrior. I have been working in the space of sustainable development, ocean and climate change for the past 2 decades. I come in on the policy front, and my area of focus has long been on climate finance. But in my role as the deputy head of delegation for Belize's COP30 delegation, I am going to be looking at all issues on the COP agenda.
Brilliant. I'm happy to hear it. And given the uniqueness of the COP30, it's been labeled as the Amazon COP. I'd like to start with your expectations. What are some of your expectations coming to COP30? What would you consider a success for ocean among COP30 outcomes?
You know, I really like the idea that we are in the Amazon, and
Mm,
I think it's important that we make a mental as well as geographical connection between the Amazon and the ocean because they're completely interconnected. Um,
mm,
for Belize, like for other small island developing states, the number one priority, and it hasn't changed since the Paris Agreement and even before that, the number one priority is that we elevate climate action and support to meet the legal benchmark of 1.5 degrees global warming limit. Legal benchmark because it's been confirmed by the International Court of Justice as such. Now,
mm,
where does the ocean fit in? Well, the ocean has a significant role in terms of global climate action. So, in the same way that we would advocate for any type of climate action on the terrestrial side of things, we would equally see it very important for support for global climate action in respect of ocean-related solutions for climate change. I
mm,
think it's really important going into COP30 that we recognize that there are some clear deliverables. This is the COP where the new NDCs are supposed to be presented and interrogated and corrected if necessary. This is the COP where the new set of indicators for the global goal and adaptation should be agreed. This is the COP following the last year's COP that agreed to a new climate finance goal. So it's a whole new landscape that we're looking at. We're going to receive a report from the COP presidencies on that new landscape. And we need to seize this moment of opportunity to see how we might be able to bring all the possible solutions, including the ocean, into the conversation so that when we leave Belém, when we leave the Amazon, we have a full perspective of where we need to go to meet that 1.5 benchmark that I mentioned at the outset.
yeah. And these are some great expectations, no doubt. Collaboration will have to be the core at them. So how do you see collaboration shaping the outcomes? What kind of collaboration is needed, with who, among who, in order to make this happen?
So if we want to focus on the issues around, ocean-based solutions for climate change, I think we need to look across different levels of collaboration. So there's the institutional collaboration that we need to think about. So in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, there are many institutions that are that have been established to drive different aspects of action. So when it comes to mitigation, there's a whole division that deals with mitigation. There's a whole work program that deals with mitigation. When it comes to finance, there are several institutions that deal with finance, including the Standing Committee on Finance. When it comes to technology and capacity building, there are mechanisms for those as well. So we would need to see collaboration through those different work programs, the different work plans for those entities to ensure that issues that are relevant, including for nature-based solutions and climate action, that those institutions take up those issues. The other area of collaboration is across regimes, and I think if the viewers and listeners of this interview recall, not too long ago, the International Court of Justice delivered an advisory opinion on climate change, and that was the third in a series of three opinions that have come from international courts. So you had the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea, and you had the Inter-American Court of Human Rights that also delivered a opinion on climate change. The reason why I highlight ICJ is because it took a very integrated approach across different regimes of what needs to be done or what are the obligations to ensure that we address this issue of climate change. So we need to take that approach as well as parties to the very different international frameworks, such as the Convention on Biological Diversity, which has its global biodiversity framework. You have, we are parties also in the International Maritime Organization and the various legal frameworks under that organization. And then there's the more recent treaty for Law of the Sea, which is the BBNJ. And I know the acronym, but maybe not everyone understands what that means. It's about the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. So those regimes all come together, as the ICJ pointed out, to help with ensuring that we are able to meet our climate change action and obligations for responding to climate change. And then, of course, there's collaboration that occurs at different levels. Nationally, of course, across different partners, but regionally and internationally, we need to see countries collaborating and coming together to elevate global climate action, including in relation to oceans.
I think that might be probably one of the more important aspects, like countries coming together and working together for these common goals, which moves us into our next question. So as countries prepare for their next round of NDCs, ocean integration becomes increasingly important. So how can countries be supported to increase their understanding of potential ocean solutions, and what can be done to promote efforts to include ocean solutions in their NDCs and NAPs? So in other words, what kind of capacity building is required?
Yeah. So I'm happy to flag that Belize actually submitted its NDC 3.0 already, and it did include various aspects relating to our marine environment. So I'm very proud to be able to say that. But it's not easy, and having spoken to several of the persons who were behind preparing Belize to make that submission, it really highlighted the importance of technical assistance, of filling data gaps, and just generally capacity building, because some of these areas are new in terms of blue carbon and how we are going to be able to establish baselines and then assess targets against those baselines. It's all, it's new, but it's not so new as well, because the IPCC has put out certain guidelines that could be helpful. The United Nations Environmental Program also has different tools that can be used. So we need to ensure that all countries have a sight of the different tools that can be used to support their interest in integrating marine issues into their national determined contributions, which are the NDCs, and their national adaptation plans, which are the NAPs. And countries can learn from each other. So establishing platforms for peer-to-peer sharing of experiences. And I think right now we've begun the whole facilitative multilateral consideration of progress in nationally determined contributions. That process might be one of the ways in which countries can learn from each other. So building that knowledge base, seeing where things can be replicated and scaled up. So it doesn't only have to occur in a national context, it can be regional, and that's something that the Caribbean community can certainly build off of. And let's not forget our local communities and our indigenous peoples. And there's a platform already that exists within the United Nations Framework Convention that allows for indigenous peoples and local communities to share their views and their tried and tested solutions or efforts to address the very significant impacts they're already facing from climate change and from other natural events. So promoting understanding through these different platforms also would be significant. So I think these are different ways in which countries can be supported to understand ocean solutions. I did want to just flag that there was an academic review that I was just taking a look at, which showed, and this was in 2023, that 50% of the updated NDCs had in fact included nature-based solutions writ large, but it was largely nature-based solutions that were focused on terrestrial or forests, and very little detail in terms of coastal or marine measures. So there's also a need for targeted support for these, if it is that we want to scale up ocean action in the context of climate action, we'll need to have targeted support for those to occur.
Thank you. I'm actually really pleased to hear that you saying and verbalizing that we need to rely on each other in this region because there's lots of best practice that we can learn from. We don't have to reinvent things or operate in silos per se. Which leads me to our other question is how do you see countries, how can they best leverage existing processes and the actions to strengthen ocean-based climate action? So, what are some of the processes that are underused or just persons might not be privy to?
Yeah. So there's this whole new process I mentioned. It was the global goal and adaptation. It was in 23 when the COP adopted let me see if I remember it, the United Arab Emirates Global Climate Resilience Framework. And I don't know if that's like commonly referred to. We mostly talk about the global goal and adaptation. But coming out from that, there was an agreement to establish a technical body to develop indicators for the global goal and adaptation. And that framework has a number of targets. And in fact, I think what can be done is to leverage that whole framework to start building in a focus on integrating marine ecosystem into those targets. And right now in the indicators. And even though it's expected or hopefully it will be agreed at this COP, as it goes, and we've seen this with Sustainable Development Goal indicators, it's an iterative process. So maybe it doesn't get in now, but if we put it on the agenda or at least on the radar of countries that, hey, this is going to be an important aspect because it is coming up in national adaptation plans and NDCs, then we can build it into the process as it develops. Other areas that can be leveraged, there's a lot of discussion around market and non-market approaches, and there's a lot of hesitance as well because of environmental integrity related issues. But if we assume that the necessary safeguards are put in place, that's another platform to leverage, because you can look to, well, in case of non-market approaches, you can look to the payment for ecosystem services, results-based payments, cooperation as ways in which you can leverage that platform to support the integration of marine measures into climate action. I think there are other aspects, and I mentioned during the discussion on, where what can be done across the different institutions. Well, let's use the programs that we have in place in the climate change process to again amplify the need for technical and financial coordination. And then outside of the climate process, I think I would just reiterate the importance that looking at, there's a merger, and this is also the beauty of the Amazon COP, right? It's bringing that whole discussion of biodiversity and climate change together. Let's use the biodiversity framework as a platform to push some of these ideas. But we need to bring them together. As you mentioned, we can't work in silos. Everything's connected. Even the courts see the different legal frameworks as connected. So let's operationalize that and leverage what we can, because we need action more than ever now.
Yes, most certainly. And that actually leads into my other question, because it's all about climate and the biodiversity agenda and how they're increasingly interconnected. And, I want to understand how we can incentivize nature-based solutions. So recognizing that climate and biodiversity, the climate and biodiversity crisis is deeply interwoven.
Yep. Yes, they're one and the same in a sense, right? Because climate impacts on biodiversity, and biodiversity can impact on climate as well, in terms of actions, but in terms of even the systems that are in place. So if we lose certain ecosystems, we lose some of the natural environments that can support climate action. So yes. So one of the areas that, if you look from a very project-based lens, one of the areas where you could probably incentivize closer relationships between climate and biodiversity is through like key performance indicators, so metrics as well, to help understand, where the benefits can occur, can be realized, whether it's from climate or in relation to biodiversity. There's a lot of talk about de-risking financing, and of course, some have seen nature-based solutions as potentially high-risk ventures. So one way to incentivize work or action in biodiversity related areas as well as climate areas is through de-risking of financing. And so you know the prescriptions better than I do, probably, working in the field, but blended finance obviously comes up as something that's pretty sort of a prescription. Belize has the experience of blue bonds. So we had a major blue bond in, oh my gosh, now I can't even remember the year because it was during COVID and I can get that COVID fog. So it was like 21, 22. When we launched a blue bond, which really was significant in many ways in terms of bringing down our debt to GDP ratio, opening up or unlocking new capital markets. But it was linked to specific targets related to marine conservation, which are now integrated in our NDCs as well. So it was a great way to channel financing or incentivize finance. But it was a strategy. It wasn't just something that, happened to occur and it happened to be that way. It was clear targets that we had integrated. And then another way is to also ensure that we do address co-benefits, and I guess this goes to the whole idea of metrics and indicators. We do address the co-benefits from in projects relative to climate and biodiversity. So I think these are some of the areas where we can do it. Some of it is, it's more on the project development and indicator side, and then there's also the financing side that needs to be looked at and how we incentivize that in creative ways.
Mm. And from your perspective, what might contribute to, the lack of funding in nature-based solutions? What would you recommend to increase the funding space? I know you mentioned earlier that, persons think it's a high risk um, area in terms of funding. So, de-risking the finance aspect, but what could also be some of the contributing factors?
So I think with nature-based solutions, the challenges with financing is not going to be terribly different from what obtains in any climate action or climate finance scenario, because we do deal with a very fragmented finance landscape. There are lots of funds
Hmm.
at different levels, bilateral, regional, multilateral. And that makes it very difficult to kind of identify, well, where do we go for finance specifically for nature-based solutions. So I think that's one thing that needs to be recognized. But also, I don't, that whole idea of understanding the co-benefits and it'll be a little bit of a learning process because once countries start putting it into their NDCs and their NAPs, then, there's a reporting line that comes out from that. Then, there's an obligation under the Paris Agreement to support NDC implementation. It sort of feed into each other, but it needs to be established, a framework needs to be established and to help incentivize that finance flow towards nature-based solutions. And it's easier done within the climate regime because you do have a financial mechanism, sorry, with three different funds. So you have the Green Climate Fund, you have the Global Environment Facility, you have the Adaptation Fund, and I guess you could also say you have the fund for responding to loss and damage, but that's post impact or recurrent impact that leads to permanent loss and damage. But through those, once it's already accepted that nature-based solutions are a part of the global climate action that's needed, then countries can decide to create special windows within those funds or pilot certain project financing through those funds. It can be done. And there is a growing interest in nature-based solutions across the developing countries. And I think at least 160 countries, if I'm not mistaken, 160 NDCs, at least
Mm.
based on one study, would have suggested that there's a reference at least to how nature-based solutions, and that might not be the exact terminology used, but how forests and coastal and marine environments can actually be used for building resilience and for dealing with mitigation of emissions.
Thank you. And thank you for that. Looking forward to governance. We touched a little bit on it, the BBNJ agreement. It comes into force on the 17th of January in 2026, which is not far off from now. It's considered a climate agreement. Do you support the statement? And if yes, why?
Well, I wouldn't say that it is a climate agreement per se, but it's certainly it is enabling of climate action. So I happen to be the co-chair of the preparatory commission for the BBNJ agreement, and we've been working on with different delegations here at the United Nations and in the United Nations to develop the framework for implementation of the BBNJ agreement. So there's a lot of hope and expectation that the BBNJ agreement can in fact be a force multiplier for climate action. Why do I say that? Well, the BBNJ applies to an area that's the equivalent of 2/3 of ocean space. 2/3. So without the BBNJ agreement, you can't get to 30 by 30 under the GBF. And 2/3 of the ocean space is 2/3 of the carrying capacity for the planet because
Mhm.
the ocean is effectively a major sink for our terrible emissions that we put into the air and we can't get rid of. So it is a regulator for climate.
Mhm.
It is, so it does something for us, but it's also absorbing and significantly impacted by greenhouse gas emissions, etc.
Mhm.
And according to the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea, we all have an obligation, whether it's under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea or whether it's under customary international law, to prevent marine pollution. So the BBNJ agreement, which takes an integrated approach to governance, which provides multiple tools that can be used for climate action at a global level, at an international level. It would be very unique in that regard. It can have a significant role in driving climate solutions at an international level, because remember, it's areas beyond national jurisdiction. So it doesn't belong to anyone, but it belongs to everyone.
Everyone at the same time. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with me today. It's been a really engaging conversation, and I look forward to COP30.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Ocean, and look forward to meeting in person.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.